So are we recording? Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming along to this session. So I'm very pleased to have Matt Collins-Jones and Carl Cookson here today, who's going to talk to us about APIs. Apparently they are the most powerful tool anyone can use. So without any further ado, I will hand over to Matt and Carl. All yours.
Thank you very much, Sharon, and thank you. I am obviously having internet problems, so just dropped out there, but I'm back. So yes, I am Matt Collins-Jones, and I'm here with my friend Carl Cookson, and we are going to be talking about APIs and why they're the most powerful tool that anyone can use. So just the basic agenda for today, we're going to do some intros about who we are. We're going to talk about what an API is. We're going to talk about using it in an API in Power Automate, using an API in Canvas apps, and using a custom connector with authenticated APIs. And we're going to wrap up and have any questions at the end. If you would like to ask any questions in the chat, looking at the chat, and just to kind of set the scene for today, this is more of an entry-level talk. It is talking about what an API is, what you can do with it, and some of the basics. It's not super complicated, so it's hopefully to try and introduce you to APIs and why they shouldn't be too scary. So hello, I will introduce myself and I'll let Carl introduce himself. So I am Matt Collins-Jones. A lot of you know me as MCJ. I'm also known as the D365 Geek on Twitter. I'm a solution architect in 365 Power Platform. I work for a company called TSG here in the UK. I'm a big XRM Toolbox fan. I'm also an MCT and an MVP, and I am not a dev.
Hi, I'm Carl Cookson.
Introduce himself.
I work for Avanade in the UK. I'm linked 365 on Twitter and my blog. I call myself a former dev because my day job is not development anymore. I do dev for fun, which is Ivan is insisting that I have got some XRM Toolbox tools out there that we can probably go into in a different talk. But yeah, that's me.
Carl has been polite there. He has some awesome XRM Toolbox tools, so I would highly recommend you check those out if you have time. I particularly like the Flow one. So let's get on with it. What is an API? This is why you're here today, and this is what we want to talk about today. So an API just stands for Application Programming Interface. So if you are familiar with other terms like user interface or user experience, that is the sort of user looking at an application and that interface. An API is where you're actually talking to the application directly. So although you may use a user interface for things like Facebook or like Dynamics or something like that, in the background, it's potentially talking to that application, and those calls could potentially be going via an API. So it's that application programming interface and not the user interface that you'd be commonly using day to day. So they can be used to talk to an application. We support and have talk in inverted commas there because it's a way for you to interact with an application. So whether that is performing actions like creating records or reading data, it's just that interface. So again, that just sort of two-way communication to either get things, pull things, do certain things. So that's what we kind of talk about. There are different API protocols. So there are things like REST or RESTful APIs and SOAP. These are just different ways to kind of different ways to interact with these APIs. So think of it a little bit like web browsers. You have HTTP and you have HTTPS. They're just different protocols that are defined in different ways to allow you to talk to things. There are also different API security models. So we're going to go through the different security models and different methods So there are things like open APIs. There are web APIs where you may need to pass in some sort of security key, like an API key or OAuth or NoAuth or something like that, to actually get access to these things as well. So the reason we want to do this talk today is that I'm not a developer. I'm not a developer. I kind of know some developer terms, but I cannot say that I'm a developer. But I've used APIs in the past, and one of the biggest things for me is just how powerful they are. And when you start using them, they're not really that scary. So the majority of this talk today is actually going to go through the actual demos of APIs and just showing you why they're not scary, how you can use them, and how you can get started. And we'll give you some examples at the end of where you can get started with APIs. So to kick things off, we're going to have Carl go through using an API in Power Automate.
Thank you, Matt. It's not letting me share.
I'll just stop sharing if that's
Not letting me share my screen. Let me just leave and come back in.
probably DNS anyway. You're back. I'm not sure whether Ferdinand needs to make you a presenter again.
I'm just checking that. He's showing as a presenter.
Yeah, my share options is not showing. I'm going to try and do it via the web application instead.
Oh, I'm sorry, but yeah,
you
are listed as a presenter.
I think you will have to make me a...
Yeah, I can see you've come back, and I've just done that now. Does that help?
Yeah, but yes, I'm hoping that you can see that now.
Yes, we can see.
On what screen can you see?
At the list of topics or names.
Right. So thank you. Sorry about that.
Some way of making the thing bigger.
This is
Cool,
the intricacies of Teams. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So just to reiterate what Matt said is that we're going to go through just to show you how to interact with an API via Power Automate. But first of all, I just want to introduce you to a collection of APIs. This is a GitHub site that basically shows you all the public APIs that are available in the world, and there's probably a few missing from here, but this is all about public APIs, so stuff that you can get to that is either via direct link, or you need to apply for an API key, or you've got some other authentication but is over the internet and provides you public information that you can use in your applications. And typically this is things like that will be business focused. So you may have, you may need to know the weather, what the weather is going to be next tomorrow. So you can make a business decision about how many ice creams to buy, for example. You may need to look up company information or other stats, etc., that are part of your business routine. So this website, and Matt's linked to it towards the end of these slides, is a great one to start and think about what you can make use of. And there's lots of great stuff about open API available within the US and the UK, as well as Food Standards Agency's API, for example. That's a great one if you're into that sort of thing and you need to ensure that your restaurants are going to be opening up next to a 5-star hygiene rating place rather than a 3-star or anything less. But you can see there's an awful lot of them. And each one of them is basically whether you need authentication against it. So some of these are listed as no, so you can probably call that straight away without any sort of authentication or any sort of activity on your part and pre-work on your part. Some of them have an API key, and this typically means that you need to register on the API for the website. And you need to use that key to get out the information. And this typically means that they limit the number of connections you have and the data available. And that's protecting the service, and probably means it's behind some sort of way that you can apply for additional abilities and additional rights if you pay for the service. But typically there'll be a freemium version. A great one for that is Mockaroo, which you do require an API key for, which allows you to generate data for use in your test environment. And there's a free version of that. You're allowed to create 20,000 records a day using that API key, but then you can pay a little bit more and pay for a monthly subscription that allows you to create millions of records a day. So it depends on your use case whether you need to do that. So let me just show you the one that we're going to use today, this is one that's one of the fun ones, and you can see there's quite a lot of them. So if you want to set up a fun little thing, Chuck Norris jokes, for example, very sweary one for Louise. As soon as she's here, we can establish that we can tell people to go away as a service. And I was building up a scenario using that, but then I looked at what was coming back from that, and even I was a bit queasy about some of the responses on that one. So I felt I might have to do a PG version. So what we're going to use is I can has dad joke. So this basically allows me to go and get a dad joke and do something with it. And what I've done in Power Automate is, my idea is that I'm going to send Matt a dad joke every day until he tells me to turn it off. And that's what I've done. So on the reoccurrence, I basically set an interval of a day and then go and get a dad joke and basically send it out. So just very, very simple. So calling a HTTP request, calling the endpoint, which is that icanhasdadjoke.com, and all I'm sending in the headers is the fact that I want JSON back. And the reason for that is that the Power Automate gives you the ability to transpose JSON into objects, and so that you can use it further down the line.
Carl,
yeah,
can you make the stream bigger a bit so we can see it?
Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
There we go.
So there we go. Just very simple. Just calling the API, and this is the same sort of pattern you would use for any sort of open API. It's a very simple pattern that you basically call it using a HTTP request. Tell it that you want something. So you're calling this with a get statement, and we then we can then just accept a response. We then go and parse a JSON, which is basically sending in the body of the response, and then we basically convert that into properties that we can use further down the line. And here I am just sending Matt a dad joke with the content from that. Here's your joke of the day with the joke that's coming back. And I'm using two options here because, you know, I'm hoping that Matt would want a second dad joke. So what happens here is if Matt says yes, at this point, his response is yes, then I send him a second, I go and get another joke, and then I send, again, parsing that and send him a second joke. And he only gets 2 jokes of the day, but, you know. So let me just show you a run of that and see how that's going through. And let's see the one that I sent him 2 hours ago. You can see that I've sent him one every day. I'm sure he'll get bored of it soon. So the inputs is just that, but the outputs is basically a JSON object. And the JSON object gives us the ID of the joke, so that if it really wanted to know that one and use it again, we can do that. And then the joke itself. We then parse a JSON, so we convert that into an object. We send an email with it, with my connection. I can't see that, and I'm now waiting for Matt to click on the yes or no. So that's basically because I'm using that send with email with options link. It's basically waiting for Matt to do something, and he said yes please because he's not had enough of it this week. And we then go and get a second joke, and we get back the joke itself. Wife told me to take a spider out instead of killing it. We had some drinks. Cool guy, wants to be a web developer. See, these are great. This is great stuff. And you know, I'm a dad to 2 boys, so I really do appreciate this stuff. And we send him a further joke. So that's simple. That's a very simple, and I know it's a bit of a jokey and a bit not very much business focused part, but it shows you how easy it is for some of these APIs to get at that information. It's not cost you any time, and it's a very much a functional way of doing things, of just using the API and making most of it. The one thing that I did want to show you before we go back to Matt is how we can really build up our understanding of APIs and how we can create those as we're going through. And what this tool is Postman. It's a free download, free to use, free account, so you can synchronize it around the places. All that stuff is all available for nothing. And what it basically does is speed up your development process, because everyone will be a developer whether you like it or not. Matt, we are going to be able to really do these things and make them easy to do. So here you can see that this is the same call that I was making, and I've just put in those parameters, and I can send it away, and I will get back the full JSON object. And
you zoom in a bit.
Sorry, I don't think I can zoom in on this.
No, not zoom. Postman. Oh, okay, never mind.
But anyway, so we now got a different joke that's come back, and then we can use it for whatever we need to. But it's a very quick and easy way of developing these and understanding the API calls rather than running it through Flow, which tends to take a bit longer to develop, and you're just basically squirting the API calls. And the same,
Carl,
you know.
Sorry to interrupt. There is a zoom under the view pull down in Postman.
Oh, is there? Thank you very much.
You go to view, yeah.
Oh yeah, it's a different button. Control. There you go. You learn something new every day. Every day is a school day. And just to show you that it's more than just getting jokes off the internet. I've got a Dynamics 365 background, and we use APIs in various guises all the time to do integrations, etc. So this Postman allows you to do some of those things for you by doing authentication, and we can then do things like just doing a simple "who am I" as a function, but we can also do a retrieve multiple. So here is one that I did earlier, which is basically going to get all the contacts that are in my system. We're just selecting the full name, the contact ID, and the gender code, and we basically go and get that information directly from it, and it allows you to build up that information. If we're using the Empower, Automate, etc., we can start using those APIs directly by the connectors we've got. But there's still some things that you can't do via those connectors that you have to fall back to the APIs on. So just be wary of them, and the fact that we can use OAuth to get some other lockdown APIs, should I say, and private APIs rather than the public ones. Right, over to Matt to move us on and go to a Canvas app. I'll stop sharing.
Cool. Thanks, Carl. So yeah, Carl used some developer things there at the end, things like retrieve multiple and everything else. But for the most part, it's just an evolution of what you showed originally, the idea of a single endpoint to hit to then retrieve some data to then do something. So this is just the same thing again. It's just we're going to look at it in slightly different contexts. Instead of using it in a flow, we're going to call it from a Canvas app and do some other stuff. So let's have a look at the Canvas app. So this was actually, I'll cancel that. This was actually one of the first APIs that I decided to make for myself. So I started looking at how to use the HTTP actions and things like that. And one thing that I really wanted to do is just figure out how they work. So I had a look at APIs, and one of the first ones I found was a site to go and get an image of a cat, because I like cats. So I did that, and in my little cute and fuzzy generator here, I have a little button that says push to see a cute and fuzzy. You press it, it goes off to the API, and what it'll do, if my internet wants to work, and if there you go, it brings back a picture of a cute and fuzzy. Just a little, just a little something to kind of see something else other than like, a piece of data or a record or something like that. We can just go off and we can find a cute and fuzzy and bring it back to light up my life a little bit. Oh, look at that one. Oh, that's so cute. So this is my cute and fuzzy generator. But this was not a lot of work to do. In actual fact, I had the flow already that it calls, but this is just a little bit of a Canvas app. So if I go into my Canvas app only has a couple of things. So we have a, if I hit 11, cool. So we have a label up here, we have an image here, and we have a button. So if you've used Canvas apps before, you'll know that you control flows from Canvas apps. So this is the code to run a flow from a Canvas app. So it says, this is the name of my flow. Power apps show me the cute and fuzzy .run is the command. And then I am taking the response from this. So I'm taking what it's going to send me back from my flow. And we're going to stick that in a variable called picture data var. And then all my images, my image container is just that variable, and then the name of my variable that I'm getting back. So that's the actual name of my response that I'm getting back from Power Automate, so the name of that parameter that I'm passing back. So that's all it is. And literally you just press a button and do that. So let's go over to Power Automate and take a look how this looks. So again, very similar to Carl's demo, but we are requesting the parameter from Power Automate first, also some Power Apps first. So that's the trigger, and then we do a HTTP request. Now, in my HTTP request, I'm using a get method, so I'm saying, hey, go get me something and bring it back. That's the method that I'm using. There are other methods available. And I'm hitting this API, which is the catapi.com. Great API. And I'm looking at their images and then doing a search on their image. So you can, there are other things that you can do. I think you can get information about cats. You can find out breeds of cats and things like that from it. And it's a free API. You just need an API key, which is this. I don't mind if you take this. It's just a free API. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't cost me anything. So, but you can just sign up with an email address and they'll give you an API key so you can get cute and fuzzies yourself. So the header is what we're sending. So the header is this X API key, and then we send the API key like that. And all that does is just it bundles this message up, sends it to that API. The API takes it and goes, okay, what's the API key? This is the key. That's the valid key. I'll let you in. You can do the thing that you're asking to do. So it's not complicated. And all of this I found on their website of how to set up the API. So it will tell you, put this as your header, put this as the value for your header, and that's it. So all good. So we do the HTTP request. And again, like what Cookie said, we're going to do a parse JSON first. So we're getting it back in the JSON, the JavaScript object notation format. It's coming back in an array because it may generate more than one. But I know from this search it's only going to be a one, so it's going to be fine. So we parse that and we do an apply to each. So what I do at this point is I take the URL, which is the image of the cat, and I just upload it to a file in my OneDrive, and I call it /cats, and I tell it to overwrite the last one so I can always get the latest one. And then I do a get file content, and then that get file content is what I paste back here. So this picture response, that was the thing that I put. So I took the variable and then put the dot picture response. And what that's doing is that's looking at what's coming back from Power Automate or from the API, and it's saying, right, okay, whatever that is from Power Automate, put that in my picture and show that. So that's all it does. And all I do is I just put a data URI expression around it to just get it in the right format that I need so that Power Apps can understand it. But I'm literally just using the body of that get file content afterwards. So it's just a case of you send the request to the API, it validates my API key, great. We parse the JSON for the response we get back, we write that to a file in my OneDrive, we send that response back to Power Apps, and then pow, you get a nice, cute and fuzzy generator where you can click and you can see a picture of a cat every day. So again, this is my first API that I built or I connected to because it was really easy to do. As you can see, it's just a few steps in a Power Automate flow, but it's not super difficult. It was just a few things and I can get an image straight into my Power Apps and I can save it and I can do what else. So not super complicated. It's just nice and easy and nice and straightforward. And I didn't use Postman. I literally just used the HTTP action. So I've spoken to people like Matt Beard, who's on the call, about Postman before. That can sometimes seem like a bit of a scary proposition because it's a new program. You don't really know how it works, but it's fairly straightforward. But you can also just use the HTTP calls inside Power Automate, and it'll start giving you errors and things like that. So you can kind of like try and figure it out. And that's all I did. So with that, I'm going to hand back over to Carl.
Did you forget my name then? Is that
Carl will take us through no?
So like, who's this guy that I'm doing this thing with?
It's just Matt Beard on the screen, and you're not anymore. So I was confused about whether I should pass it to Matt from some APIs.
Well, you can do. He's probably a lot more knowledgeable than the pair of us, to be honest. Okay, so we've had a bit of fun. We've used a couple of APIs that are public and accessible throughout, and we know that it's not really got a use case. But what about a use case where we have a business subject, you know, where we do want to do something? And we thought about the various use cases that you can have that are all Dynamics related or SharePoint, etc. But this is the one that annoys me from a usability point of view, and as we've implemented to great effect in various clients and in various guises. But the idea that when you've got lots of teams in Microsoft, and you want external users to get access to them, how do you manage that? How do you get that approval working, and how do you fully allow the end users, the owners of those teams, to see those requests and apply those things to it? And there's probably a load of other ways of doing it, but making that public to someone that you send the form to allow people to do that, rather than through any sort of acknowledgement, etc., is a great use case for flow approvals, as well as using the APIs that are available to you. And the one that we are going to use here is the Graph API. So just going to start off here is basically where we're going to use a form to request access to a team. So this form, I will enter my details in and we'll go from there. And I just want access to a team. I'm just going to try and think of an email address that I haven't used for this, but anyway, I want to access the Matt's Heroes team. I click because I know that Matt will be the admin of that team, and we should be able to see that. Maybe I'll have to do the other one because I don't think Matt's on my tenant actually. So the idea is that we'll get this request from a public form. So we're just using Microsoft Forms here, just the standard one, not the customer voice. and anyone can ask for access to a team. And what would that happen in the back is that I would get an email, I would approve it, and then we would have to create the guest user within the tenant, and then we would associate that user with the team. So both of those are normally admin tasks. You would normally have to have someone that would be administrator of teams, etc., to add the guest users. But this is how we're going to automate it. So I'm just going to submit that so we've got one going. So let's just have a quick look at the flow, and we can just work through the flow to see how we're going to use the APIs and various parts of this. So we do get a response. So when we get a response to that form, we then go and get the response details. And then we can then use the out-of-the-box APIs to go and list the teams that are in our tenant. So there's no filtering here. So what I do need to do then is filter that array. So I'm going to get all the teams lists and filter it to basically say, find that team that is of the one that the user selected. So which team will hold that string to say, I want to be part of Matt's team or my team. And then all I'm doing there is converting a body and basically getting the ID from the returned object. And then I'm going to pass to my custom connector. And this is where we start getting into custom connectors and the Graph API. So the Graph API is available in some respects. If I do a new action here, I can see that some of the objects are available. Microsoft Graph API, but not all the objects are available. They've not exposed everything, and it should presumably over time they will, but for now we've not got that. So what I'm doing is going to use a custom connector. So this little green circle, etc., is the custom connector logo by default. But if I go and have a look at my custom connector, and I've got two of them here, and we can probably go into Spotify one another day, and I think that's Louise again that gave me all that information. I'm going to have a look at what that Graph API custom connector is all about. So I might go and edit it. So we're on the general idea of general part of the process for the Graph API. We established the icon and the color, but we want to go and get to this HTTP endpoint, graph.microsoft.com, and the URL. But let's talk about security, because I need to, Graph API is for every tenant, for every organization that Microsoft has in the world. So there's an awful lot of users of it. So we need to tell it which person that you're running as, and therefore which tenant you're looking at information across. So we do that via security, and we basically give it a client ID and a secret, which is established for me. Now, this will involve some configuration by your Azure administrator and your information that you have available. And if I swap over, and I will zoom in on this again, and this is not working for me at the moment. I don't know whether Azure's got a problem, but it wasn't working. It wasn't letting me display it. No, because it's got this temporary network issue. I'm not sure what that is. But the idea here is that your Azure administrator would give that client ID and client secret. So you can see the client ID here. So this random GUID and the client secret, which is down here, is already configured, which I can't get to anymore. Access to certain things, and we give the API permissions to get at certain parts of our infrastructure. And here we're explicitly targeting the Graph API, but you could expose dynamics, you could expose teams, you could expose all these other things that are available. So we basically say, using this client ID and this secret, if an API call to that Graph API comes in, this is the permissions that I grant it. So we do that within the Graph API configuration. We give it API permissions, and you can see I've got a problem here. But here it would list all the permissions that I have granted this API call, and I would have to give it explicit permissions for the Graph API to allow us to do that. So how do we know what permissions I need to grant? Well, Microsoft have given us a tool for that too. They have given us this Graph Explorer, which allows us to go and explore the Graph API and create functionality that is available via that, expose user functionality to test and to train our API. And this is logging in as me on my tenant, but I can do very simple things like run a query to get back who am I, and it's telling me exactly who I am because I've granted it some permissions. But if I wanted to go and get to-do lists, it's actually telling me the permissions that I need. So I need to give that the task.readWrite permission. If I run that query now, it basically says I'm not allowed because I haven't given my login access to that via this route. And therefore I can start using these rights to limit to expose certain things to certain users. So use the Graph API to go a little bit deeper into all these things that are available to you. Certainly in one of the most common ones we use within our deployments, etc. And it's this main one that Microsoft is starting to expose to everybody and is available to everybody. Okay, so to go back to the connector, which I've lost, there it is. We've got a client ID and secret, so that ties my call back to the permissions I've granted, and then to define what's available. So I've done a few things here. Firstly, just for my own testing, I've got this me. So I just then go and get me, and it will return objects that are available, and the same as that original Graph Explorer that I called. And therefore, when I call me, it will use the credentials that are within this connector to go and do that. But I also do other things, and one of them is invite someone to my tenant. So there's a part of the Graph API is this invitations, and what that is expecting within that is an email address, a display name for it so that it can use it in the invite, and a message. We can look at the message, the invitation message, and we can just basically say that we're going to default that to true because I want it to send an invite if I've not got a user already on this tenant. So which means that if I can call that through Power Automate, I can bypass all of that security and make available to whoever calls that custom connector and pass that through and invite someone to my tenant quite easily and straightforward without going through the process and automatically. And the same goes for all of these other things. So we've got the get owners of a group, which we can use, and we can get a user, basically go and get the email address of an ID that's been passed in. So in the owners of the groups will come back as a user ID as the GUID, and we need to turn that into what the email address is. So that's another one that we're using the Graph API for. So back to the flow. That's, oh no, that is the right one. So we are going through. So we basically decided which team they want to access. We then go and get the owners of that team. So we pass in the team ID to the custom connector and get back a list of owners of that team. We're going to parse a JSON. We use that all the time when we're talking with the APIs to basically change the response into a load of objects. And then we go and select. We basically want to go and just get the mail of that return item and basically convert that. So I've only got an array of just the mail objects, so just the email addresses. I combine them into a single string, which means that I get an array of objects of several email addresses because there could be several owners of a team, and combine them into a string. so that I will get a string with a semicolon so that I can use in my approval. So in my approval, I basically assign it to several individuals, and that's that string, that's that combined string. And I basically send them an approval, approve and reject. So a new member of the team, and give the first name and surname that came from that forms entry that the first user did, wants to join your team, and list the team that we're impacting. We assign it like I just said, and then we can give it a little bit more, a few more details. Maybe we've included the email address in there as well. So what basically that means is I get an approval, and let me go to my approvals here, hopefully, if things are working. Yeah, so 10 minutes ago, I got an approval so that I want to be added to my own team. It makes it a bit daft, but anyway. And I can actually approve at that point. I can say approve or reject. If I approve it and confirm, once that's done, we can go back into our flow. So we're basically saying, if it's approved, we go and get the user in our tenant and check that the email address that we've been given is within our tenant as a guest user. If they are, then we can just add them to a team, because I've said I want them to be added to the team through the approval. If they're not, I send the invite again through that custom connector, a different method, but the same principle is that we invite that person to the you can put whatever you want in that URL, but to the tenant, and therefore give them the usual, when you get invited to a tenant, you get the little accept, etc. And then I invite that person to that team. So once they've accepted that invitation, and we've gone through the principle to check who they are, we invite them to that team. And therefore, we're using a standard API in this scenario, but it needs that invited user's ID. And that's the ID of the user that's within our tenant, and it effectively adds them to our team. So what we see when we go all the way through this is that if I go to the teams, I'm not sure I can get to this. Let me see. Probably in the wrong tenant now. Yeah. Go away. We'll get in several of the teams. You can see my approval is just pinged up. I can check the team members, and I can see that I've got 2 guests, one that's just come in, and my testing. That was me probably last week that was doing that when we were doing it. So, and that process is I've not had to go into this thing. I just get an email, I just hit OK, and we go through from there. But in terms of APIs, that use of a custom connector, yes, it's dev work because you'll need an admin to configure, but then if you publish that custom connector to the rest of your organization and allow your other users to start using it, it turns that dev activity into something that your wider group can use. So you're crossing that boundary between a dev and that citizen dev term that everyone seems to hate nowadays. But the idea of becoming a more functional use of a dev tool. Okay, back to Matt to finish us off, as it were.
Yeah. So that is an awesome use case. One, as Charles said, kind of comes up all the time, and it does. Like trying to add guests to teams and things like that can become laborious. So it's a case of you implement once, you spend a bit of time doing it, you save loads of time. So that's a real business use case for an API, and the Graph API being Microsoft's way to handle that is kind of simple, because it gives us that Graph API Explorer and things like that. We can build it into custom connectors so that everyone else in the business can do it. I previously used it using just a HTTP call as well. So there's like loads of different ways you can do this. So in conclusion, APIs are extremely powerful and versatile. Yes, me and Carl, sent jokes and sent pictures of cats to each other, but there are actual use cases for it where you can connect to different pieces of data. You can connect to things like company's house and retrieve company's information. You saw the food hygiene stuff that Carl showed as well. So many different use cases and so many different ways to do things. So yeah, there are thousands of applications that you can be accessed, hundreds in the open API category that you can just try without licensing or without having to pay anything. Different security protocols might be tricky, but once you're connected, there's no stopping you. That's kind of important, that sometimes you probably are going to run into an issue with security. I kind of mentioned Matt Beard earlier, but Matt helped me with an API that I was trying to call recently, and it was mainly because the documentation and the instructions were out of date. So it's one thing to look out for, but once you get connected and once you get through those small hurdles, there's no stopping you, because you'll be able to do this all the time and you'll get more used to it and things like that. So there are some great resources to get started with. That's that GitHub link for the public APIs, which Louisa actually dropped into the chat earlier. Thank you. That is what Carl showed. There are hundreds of APIs. There's also public APIs.io. That cat API is the one that I used. And you can just go off and find other APIs. Some of them may require certain licenses and things like that. Some of them may be free to try, and you have to pay after X number of things. But it's the idea is here that it shouldn't be scary to you. I'm not a dev, and I created a connection to an API. Carl is a dev and showed some awesome things. Former dev showed some awesome things, and he and just showed you just the power of what you can do. So you shouldn't be afraid to try new things, and you shouldn't be afraid of this sort of experience. So with that, thank you all very much for attending. If you want to move on to the next slide, no, just a little bit. I've been MCJ. We also have Cookie. Those are our social media details if you want to follow us. And if anyone has any questions and wants to come off mute and ask anything, we are here for the next few minutes.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Carl. That was very interesting. I've certainly learned a few things there, and interesting to see this in the context of Power Platform items. So I think a round of applause is in order here. If you want to unmute, and let's have some applause.
Thank you, Faraday. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. So we've got we've got a lot of time actually. The next session is at 1:30. So Matt and Carl have said they're happy to take some questions. So feel free to ask some questions, or perhaps go and have some lunch.
Yeah, definitely lunchtime. No,